I got to tell you, Brad Geiger might have single-handedly saved my marriage just now.
Oh, my God.
Well, if not saved my marriage, certainly gave me an unbelievable amount of joy. So here's what happened. My wife is writing a TV project right now, and she makes a post on Instagram, and she goes, hey, guys, it's one of those stories that, will disappear in 24 hours. She goes, hey, guys, Gloria here.
Okay.
I have a song in my head that I thought was Gershwin that I need for a scene. Makes me cry every time, but it turns out it's not Gershwin. I just looked it up, but it goes like this, and then she proceeds to go. I'm like, what are you? So I posted back to her on Instagram. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing to me. This is the post of a crazy person. And then she proceeds to FaceTime me, and she goes, I need to know what this song is. What is this song? And I go, well, I'm starting a podcast with Brad Geiger right now. Can we talk later? She goes, get Brad on FaceTime. Hold on, we're going to figure this out. And so Brad's delightful face pops into the FaceTime. She repeats the song, and by God, if in 5 seconds Brad Geiger doesn't go, oh, that's Claire de Lune. That song is Claire de Lune that you're And I'm sitting here dumbfaced. I cannot believe that the weird mumblings translated in Brad's brain into Claire de Lune. And you were like, oh, yeah. First of all, the fact that you knew what the title was, you knew it in seconds, and also that you could translate the weird mumblings into Claire de Lune.
I can name that tune in 5 notes.
But it's such a weird, like, even in Name That Tune, don't they use a piano key to go ding, 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 ding? It is so hard to do it from a human voice where it's imperfectly tuned.
Yeah, because it's in tune in your head, because in your head you've got the background and everything else. You've got the strings and the harps and the fiddles. The accordions.
So I want you to know, Brad, that in the course of my marriage, you have just been elevated like 7 levels now. Now when I refer to Brad Geiger, she'll now think of Brad Geiger, the friend who saved me with Claire de Lune when I couldn't think of it. You've moved up in the hierarchy, Brad.
Are you talking about musical genius, Brad Geiger?
Am I talking about local musical professor Brad Geiger?
Yes.
Local specialist on Claire de Lune. By the way, who's Claire de Lune? Is that Mozart?
Brain
professor!
Aren't you supposed to be reading about how this is Comic Lab? Would you get to your
I will
your
say,
notes?
Everybody, hello and welcome to Comic Lab, the show exclusively about musical notes and making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of the Webcomics Handbook on Substack and creator of Evil Inc.
And starting in the fall, full-time musicology professor at USC. That's right, Brad Geiger will be teaching at the University of Southern California's music department, world famous for his musicology. I'm his friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by Claude Debussy and patreon.com/comiclab. Thanks to a quick Google, Claude Debussy.
Is that like a super Midwestern pronunciation of that name, by the way? Because that can't be right. That can't be right.
looks like Debussy to me. So, Claude, let's talk comics.
Well, Brad. Okay, let's go. Let's talk comics. So we have a huge show for listeners, and especially for first-time listeners and people new to webcomics. This is the episode for you. This is an episode where Brad and I are going to go deep into the weeds.
Yeah.
And so for first-time listeners, I should give some context. Brad Geiger, my co-host, is a 25-year webcomic veteran, has been producing multiple titles online, has had well over a dozen books produced, I think, at this point, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Has written 3 books on how to write webcomics, and is an expert in the idea of independently producing comics and making a career out of it.
And my co-host, Dave, has been doing almost all of that, and he started earlier. Dave was actually online way before me, was able to transition to full-time comics well before I did, has published dozens of books, and is a guy that can speak about this stuff from a first-hand basis in terms of somebody who's not only been there for a while, but has survived over what I count as 5 major shifts in online publishing since there has been an internet to publish on. So what we're going to be doing here is talking to you from a firsthand basis of a couple of people who have been there. The first thing you're going to say is, well, it was different when you started, Brad. And that's absolutely true. It was different when both Dave and I started. But we have been able to survive, like we said, through 25 years of this. And we've got a pretty good idea of what it takes to publish webcomics in 2025.
Absolutely, because the simple truth is we are still in the trenches. Building and maintaining and growing an audience is a constant fight. You are always losing 1 to 5% of your readership and hopefully always gaining 2 to 6% into your readership. So anyway, this is two guys who want to pass on what they know, their best practices for folks looking how to start a webcomic in 2025. So Brad, what point do we want to start at for folks?
Well, let's start out with some general stuff. Let's talk about the comic itself. And my first piece of advice here is not to try to game your readership, right? In other words, we see this a lot in webcomics, somebody that says, oh, this certain trend is very popular right now. This certain demographic is very hot right now. This certain genre is very hot right now. So I'm going to write about that thing. Therefore, I'll be successful.
Right.
And that kind of thing rarely, if ever, works unless it just so happens that you've got a fascination, a deep abiding love for that topic. If you're trying to say, well, I'm going to do this thing because monster romance is really popular. That's great. And by the way, monster romance is a very popular genre right now.
It's very popular.
Very popular with our taxi drivers.
As a New York cabbie could tell you, people love it when a Minotaur is going to town. So monster romance is a big hit right now.
Thank you, Jimmy the Tax. I'm so happy Jimmy the Cabbie is back. That makes me so happy.
We haven't used that character in a while, have we, Jimmy the Cabbie? Hey, but he loves monster romance. I tell you what, you give me a giant Cthulhu thing going to town on somebody, I'm here for it. All right.
But unless you also happen to have a real deep love for that, you're not going to do well. You're going to be much, much better taking another tact, right?
Absolutely. One of the reasons why Kate Beaton could make historical comics work for her, or Mike or Jerry could make video game comics work for them, is because they had an intrinsic love for it. It grew out of a spark of joy first, and then happened to have tapped into a vein of interest online. But Brad's right. It's not, in no way should you be trying to see or spot a trend and then trying to latch onto it. The most successful comics come from a personal love, a personal passion that taps into sometimes an existing audience, sometimes creates an entirely new one, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, well, my fellow Philadelphian Box Brown is another really good example. He did a book on professional wrestling.
Yes,
and you can
great
see
example.
In his comics, he was clearly a big wrestling fan. You know, the comic has got to be from your heart. And I know you get this advice all the time. You know, just do the comic that's in your heart. You know, we hear write the comic that you wish was in the world and all those kind of flowery statements. But really, the fact of the matter is that's good advice. Do that comic. Even if you think it's really dumb, even if you think nobody's going to like it or nobody could possibly be interested in it, what happens is that you might be right. No, maybe not a lot of people woke up this morning thinking that they were going to delve into a comic about this thing that's in your head.
Right.
But the thing that's going to make them into readers isn't necessarily the topic itself. 9 chances out of 10, it's the enthusiasm, the joy, and the love that they can see emanating from this thing. And as wacky as it sounds, people are drawn to that. People are drawn to you when you're doing this thing that you love. It shines through and people gravitate towards that.
Absolutely. And here's why that's important. Building a readership takes time. It takes consistency.
Yeah.
And for time and consistency to be applied to your comic, it has to be about creating it for love. because that's so essential in the early years when you have neither the audience nor the money coming in to justify the time you're doing it, right? So building a readership, knowing going into it that this is going to take you time and it's going to take you consistency and it's going to take you consistently crafting better and better work as you go, that requires love and passion and personal dedication to a thing that you love, that you find passionate, that you want to create, not something that is artificially taken on because it's a trend or artificially taken on because you think that that's an existing audience you can tap into. It has to come from within because time and consistency are so important here.
Well, and let's face it, when Dave says do it for the love, that really is going to be a theme here because, full disclosure, building an audience takes time. It takes a lot of time. And we all start, you can be easily forgiven for thinking that you're going to post this thing and people are going to be like, oh my God, where's this comic been all my life? And they're just going to flock to your social media site or your platform or your website. We're going to talk about all three of those things. Right. They're going to just gravitate, they're going to flock
immediately.
To you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And the truth of the matter is that sort of thing happens for very, very few people. In fact, most of the overnight successes that are around you have been doing this for 10 years and you're just finding out about them today.
Right.
Yeah, it takes a long time.
It's the band that you thought is a small band, but lo and behold, even though you discovered them today, they've been touring around the Midwest for the better part of a decade, working on their craft and honing their art, and you are just finding them today. Same thing with webcomics. Yes.
Yep, and that's why you got to do it for the love, because the first couple of years, the first several years in some cases, you're not going to get money. You're not going to get huge audience numbers. You're not going to get any of that. So you've got to love it. The love is the only thing that's going to keep you through those first crucial years of developing your comic, because you're not, be honest with yourself. You're not going to get those other things. It's going to take a long time for those to build.
Yes. And because you have to embrace the process and because you have to know that many of the first comics, may only be seen by you. Yeah. One thing that Brad and I try to say again and again is focus on the writing as the core act of the comic creation.
Right.
And focus on the joy of that. What does that joy bring you? How can you improve the story? And granted, we are two cartoonists who self-admittedly say we come from a writing background into comics rather than a drawing background in comics. We've gotten better, and I think now we're actually quite okay as artists, but we both started from a writing standpoint. And I think in a small way, even though we're biased, there is a tiny acknowledgement that the story, the writing aspect of comics is a great place to really put your focus at first, because it's the ideation, it's the characters, it's the plot, it's their motivations that hook people into your story.
Yeah, the bottom line is they're called comics readers, not comics lookers. This is a reading.
Brad, I like to think of myself as a comics looker.
You are one of the few comics lookers. Let's face it. When it comes to the world of comics, you are unfortunately a looker. But no, the writing is where it's at. Good writing always is going to save not so great art, and that equation seldom, if ever, works in the reverse. And the problem is that when you look around the comics community in terms of the creators, I'd say 80% of them came to comics because of the visual side of the medium, because they are artists, because they like the visual, they're good at the visual, and that's what drew them to comics. And the problem with that is that the readers are drawn to comics for the stories. And if your story isn't good, if you can't write well, if you can't make something compelling happen, you're going to have a lot of difficulty building an audience. So if that's you, if we're describing you right now, somebody who is primarily an artist and is drawn to comics, you've got your work cut out for you, because the first thing you've got to do is focus laser sharp on your writing, what it means to do writing. All of that is absolutely true across the board. If you're trying to do humor, it is 10 times as true as it was for anybody else, because humor falls flat. The image is not going to save a badly written punchline, a badly written concept. if you're trying to do humor, your writing has to be extremely sharp. You've got to really know not how to do humor in general. You might be a very funny person in person, in a face-to-face or on a stage or something like that. But making humor come across in writing is very difficult. So if this is you, first thing we want you to do is focus very, very sharply on your writing.
Now, let's talk about the act of starting.
Yeah.
Because if you're anything like Brad and I and a whole host of other cartoonists, you have a little bit of anxiety about starting because in a way, what you have is a phrase that Brad loves to use and is super apt for this, which is you have paralysis from analysis.
Yeah.
You know you want to start. And you know from having read tons and tons and tons of comics in your childhood and young adulthood and adulthood, you know what you like in comics, you know what you want to achieve in comics, but you're not quite sure how to get you there. And so you don't even start. But what Brad and I want to encourage you with is just start. Of course, think about it a little bit. Of course, plan it out a little bit. That's fine. But make sure you start. Don't let yourself stop because of anxiety or stop because of fear of making mistakes. Mistakes are okay. Mistakes are what you will want in the first 10 years.
Yes.
Mistakes in the early stages are recoverable. You can fix things. And in fact, something we don't often talk about is because you will be cartooning largely anonymously online at first, in the sense of you don't have an audience yet, a lot of those mistakes will never be seen by 99% of the people that will eventually come to read your comics. Your mistakes are okay at this stage, so just start.
And whatever you do, don't be one of these people that doesn't start their comic because they're scared as soon as they put it online, someone's going to steal it. Oh, and we've seen this for 25 years. For as long as Dave and I have been doing personal appearances at comic conventions, we've seen at almost every one of them, somebody comes up and says, well, I've got this comic idea, but I don't want to publish it online because somebody will steal it. And the fact of the matter is it is very difficult. First of all, there are no new ideas. There are absolutely no ideas. What makes your comic special isn't the idea, it's the way you execute that idea. Okay? Mm-hmm. And so for somebody to steal your idea is almost like, well, that idea, if you traced it throughout time, you'd probably see that idea iterated dozens, if not hundreds of times. The idea is
you got the coreness of the idea. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But it's the thing that is going to make you special is your execution of that idea. So don't be one of these people that is scared to publish online because someone's going to steal my idea. Forget about your idea. Between you and me, your idea isn't that precious. Your execution is going to be what makes you stand out.
That's right. So let's talk about, like, you've drawn one comic panel, one comic strip, three comic panels, three comic strips. You've done a couple of pages of your comic story. You've started. Yeah. Hooray. That's wonderful. Now the question is, where and how do you start sharing it, right?
Yes.
And one thing Brad and I want to say, because Brad and I, to give you the context of who we are, we're very big proponents on remaining independent comic creators. Basically, that means we own and control 99%, if not 100% of our career. Yeah. We are the ultimate arbiters of where things go, how they're sold, what they're sold for, how they're made. There's no publisher, there's no intermediary, there's no storefront that's not us. We own and control our whole career. And I think partially, just to give you some context, partially why we've lasted 25 years is because we own and control our own career. Yeah. So one of the things we want to just tell you as you begin to share your comics is that you don't need to be on Webtoons and Tapas and the kind of bigger platforms that have developed in the last 5 years or so. You can, we're not saying you can't, but we're saying you don't need to, because a lot of younger cartoonists in their late teens and 20s think, well, that's the place to be. I've got to do that. Well, I'll tell you just from a legal standpoint, there's a couple of phrases in the Webtoons and Tapas contracts that you might not have noticed. One is the word perpetuity. You can search for it. And one is a rights claim that, while not exclusive to Webtoons and Tapas, will limit your ability to sell the title down the road if you ever wanted to sell it for TV or for publishing or for video games or what have you, whatever other medium you might want to put it in. There is a limitation, or there is a rights claim made in perpetuity again from Webtoons and Tapas. You don't need to be on there, right, Brad?
Right. And I think another word last I checked was irrevocable.
Yeah, exactly.
Irrevocable is a word that I don't like to see in a contract at all. So that's, and what happens is very often you'll hear somebody say, well, I've got to be on Webtoons because that's where the comics readers are. And there are so many problems with that sentence. You see that advice given in comics circles a lot. You got to be on Webtoons because that's where the comics readers are. So let's tear that apart a little bit and talk about it because it's untrue. It is absolutely 100% untrue. Number one, go to Webtoons, the homepage of Webtoons or Tapas, and look at every single title that's at the top of their list, their most popular things. And you will see that they all fit into, or almost all of them, with maybe a couple little exceptions. They're all the same thing. They've all got the same theme. They've all got the same look. They've all got the same style. If your comic does not fit that theme, I'm sorry to break it to you, you're not going to do well on Webtoon. You're just not. Take a look at that main page. Take a look at the most popular stuff. There's a lot of people who kidded themselves or talked themselves into believing they've got to be on Webtoons. Their comic looks nothing like those comics that are at the top. It's never going to be that. It doesn't cover the same themes and topics, and they're lying to themselves if they think they're ever going to end up anywhere near the top. Here's the second thing I want you to talk about. The problem with I've got to be on Webtoons because that's where the comics readers are. Take it for somebody that's been doing this for about 25 years. I am not looking for a comics reader. That's the last thing on my mind.
Oh, yeah.
That's like, again, my example on this is always, that's like McDonald's saying, I'm looking for someone who likes food. Right? It's very generic because there's 100 billion different types of comics, right?
Right.
I don't care about comics readers. In fact, I do a lot of my outreach specifically for people who are not comics readers. I want my comic maybe to be the first comic they've ever followed for a significant amount of time, the first comic that ever enraptured them or got them interested. I want to be their first. I'm not looking for comics readers, and I think it's a big mistake. Instead, I'm looking for readers who are interested in the themes that I write about, in the concepts, in the stories that I'm good at, in the sense of humor that I bring, all of those things. I'm looking at big ticket items. Finding someone who knows what a word balloon is, that's useless. I'll show you what a word balloon is in 2 panels. You'll pick it up relatively quick. It's lexicon that's been around for over 100 years. That's not a problem. Finding somebody who's interested in my particular brand of writing, that's what I'm after.
So then the question becomes, where do you go? Where do Brad and I recommend? And we'll say social media presence is still very important for comics creators. Now, the caveat here is that we are in somewhat of a liminal changing period for social media, where social media platforms that were dominant and still are numerically dominant on the market are not necessarily the places we recommend for web cartoonists to go in 2025. Today, we wouldn't recommend, even though it's numerically dominant, we wouldn't necessarily recommend Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or Tumblr. Brad and I would recommend Blue Sky and Substack. And why do we recommend those two, Brad?
Yeah, well, because those are the places that are proven to deliver engagement and growth. And that's the two things that we're after. Also, you'll notice
I was also going to jump in to just say one last engagement, growth, but also the ability to link out consistently to the things that can translate to your career having success.
Right. Yeah. And without being punished by the algorithm.
Right.
But there's a couple that you like. Threads. I don't even count Threads anymore.
Oh, God,
TikTok is very, very strong, assuming like at the time that we're recording this, we still don't know whether TikTok is going to get banned in the US, although between you and me, I really don't expect that to happen. But TikTok is not a great choice for a comic artist because everything you're going to have to do on TikTok involves some degree of animation or a serious amount of video production. And at some point, although I see people on TikTok all the time that seem to be doing it very, very well, the problem is are you going to is the cost benefit analysis working on your side? Are you able to do that TikTok outreach in such a way that you're not spending so much time on it that you're not spending time on your comic? You've got to do a benefit analysis there is to the point where this is actually something you can do, and it's just promotion. And then you can get on with doing your actual comic. At some point, it takes up too much time to be a good cost-benefit analysis.
And not all of us have the face skills or performative skills to translate onto TikTok. And even though some romance novelists have used TikTok effectively in terms of describing with emotion what their romance book delivers, it's a little harder to describe with emotion or show with emotion a static comic presented page on a visual medium. It's like a librarian trying to use interpretive dance to describe what their library does. You know, it's like it's just the wrong tool for the job for what we do. So we do recommend Blue Sky. It is a growing medium that offers good blocking controls. They do have a couple of hiccups for a couple of reasons, and both in terms of the technology behind it and some of the people behind it. But in general, Blue Sky and Substack seem to be offering what cartoonists want, which is a growing engagement for a growing audience and the ability to link out to the Patreons, the Kickstarters, the book sales that you'll eventually have down the road. And that sort of was the death knell for Threads and Twitter, for example, is that they had the audience, they had the impetus behind them for continued growth, and they kind of screwed the pooch by limiting algorithmically what you could link out to. And it killed the artist's desire to share their stuff there because there was no quid pro quo. And that's sort of the thing with social media is there is a sort of social compact quid pro quo of I will give you free content for your platform and your platform's audience. You have to allow me to link out. And when they stop doing that or they governor it with algorithms, it breaks the social compact.
Now, we're not going to go deep on Blue Sky or Substack at this point, although we've talked about on the show in the past some strategies for building audience on each of those. But since this has kind of a broader topic, we're not going to get into the weeds on those specifically. However, I am going to tell you that at patreon.com/comiclab, we have collections for each of those topics. We've got a Blue Sky collection and we've got a Substack collection. And they go down, even the Substack collection even gives you a template on how the 7 things that each one of your comic posts on Substack should have, so that you're maximizing the use of Substack, not only as a publishing arm, but its SEO and its promotional abilities. We do all of that, and they're all collected in those collections. Now, if you're a Patreon backer, you can go to the collections tab there at patreon.com/comiclab, and you can access all that stuff as part of your membership to our comics community. If you're not a Patreon backer yet, you can go to those collections and you can just buy them for a one-time purchase. You can get all of those episodes, including a bunch of episodes that we've done publicly and a whole ton of stuff that we've done for Patreon exclusives that nobody outside of Patreon has heard before, that go really deep into actionable advice on how to build audience on those 2 platforms.
But we will share a couple of quick bullet points on this. Number one, Brad and I know that both Substack and Blue Sky, like all the platforms we've used in the past, will eventually in-shitify. We're not saying, we're not holding them up as some angelic platform that will forever be good or even are angelically good right now. There's a whole host of problems potentially with both of them. But what we're saying is they are a useful tool right now. They are useful to use for the next 3 to 6 years until the shinification process really begins. So jump on them. Use them for 2025 as you begin to start, launch, and grow your audience. And then we're also going to say a couple more bullet points. You've got to stay active on social media to build your audience. This is not something that you can just sort of set it and forget it, post 1 comic a week, and wham, bam, you're done. Persistence is key here. You've got to keep posting the comics. You've got to follow up with the people that do spark interest, because human contact or somewhat parasocial relationships do help to grow the audience. So you've got to be able to respond. You've got to be able to go back and chat with them in a friendly manner, but all within the boundaries of normal social media contact. Don't in any way endanger yourself, none of that stuff. We're saying just pleasant, like, thanks so much. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Thanks for sharing the comic, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It can be helpful in being on a social media platform.
So in terms of figuring out how you are going to approach social media, everybody has different lines for what they're willing to do or able to do and what they're not, right? Some of us share an awful lot of personal information on social media. Some of us don't share hardly anything that's personal. Everybody's got their own line, and it's possible to succeed no matter where you draw that line. Okay,
right, where you are on that spectrum.
Yeah. So the first thing to say is you don't have to feel as if you need to do something you're not comfortable doing. You do need to figure out where that line is for yourself. But once you've done that and you've got your boundaries, full speed ahead. And so let's talk about some of our advice for social media. First one is this. You'll hear us, if you hear this show any amount of times, you're going to hear us talk about the 4 C's of social media. That's content, commercial, curation, and the 4th C is kindness. But it could just as easily be comment if you wanted to put a C in there, right? Let's talk about those really quick, because a real common problem that a lot of first timers fall into on social media is they hit that content button really hard with the comic and don't do anything else under that category, and they certainly do the other 4 C or the other 3 C's of social media. So content, number 1, that's posting your comic. That's content. And you want to post the comic as much as you can so that I can read that entire comic on that social media platform.
Exactly. You don't have to go anywhere. It's right there. That's key.
Even though Blue Sky lets you link out without penalizing you, as a reader, I'm not going to do it. And this is one of the first things we learned 25 years ago, back when even asking a reader to scroll was too much. Any step that you put between your reader and what you want them to do is a step too far. That comic has to be readable on that social media platform, not a link to someplace else. None of that. That's a part of content. But it's not the full thing. It's not the full category. Other content is stuff that you choose to share from your own mind, your ideas, your thoughts, your stories. Anything that comes out of your head is content. And again, you have to decide how much you want to share, but there's lots of wiggle room, even if you don't want to share a whole lot of personal information.
Absolutely. Now, the second one is going to be curation. In addition to the content that you're sharing, that you're originating, you're also passing along and sharing both interesting tidbits and other comics, especially, that you find online. Now, why do you do that? One is because you become a trusted source of quality editorializing. Your sharing is a way of editorializing. There's a lot of chaff out there. Here's a bit of wheat that I found. Right? So that's number 1. Number 2 is social media being an ecosystem. You want other people to be curating your comments and sharing them to their readership. There is a quiet quid pro quo of I'm sharing Brad's stuff, Brad sharing my stuff. Dozens of other cartoonists are sharing one another's stuff, and slowly it is a rising tide of sharing readerships and allowing 10% of your readers to drift over there for a moment to see a new cartoonist that they might incorporate into their daily and weekly trawl, right? That curation, though, is important.
Yeah, and there's another word for that, and what Dave just said, and that's networking. Right?
Yes,
this is a way
it's a
that you're
version of
doing
online
networking.
Yes. Yeah.
Curation is one of the most underlooked powers of social media in terms of people who want to grow their numbers. Curation is one that almost nobody does because we're artists. We're like, you're following me because I'm a creative person. I don't want you. Why would you go anyplace else? I'm the best, right? That's how an artist or a writer thinks. And you've got to break yourself of that. Curation is a great way for you to reinforce your brand by what you choose to curate, and also network. And it's the one thing that people don't do nearly enough. Curation should be part of your daily thought process on social media. The third one, however, is the one that everybody does and maybe a little bit too much of, right?
And maybe rushes to it a little bit too early. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to talk about monetization coming up, but commercial, that's your third C of social media is commercial. And that's where you say, come join us on Patreon, pledge to my Kickstarter. I've got a book for sale. I've got this, I've got that. Commercial is way too prevalent. And it's okay to do a lot of commercial if you're doing a lot of the other 4 C's as well. But commercial is the drum that we hit way too hard, way too loud. And as a result of that, we get tuned out because when those people following you hear the same tune over and over and over again, even if it's a beautiful tune like Claire de Lune by Debussy.
By who?
By Claude
by who?
Debussy.
Debussy?
Debussy.
Hey, Dad, look, it's too open Debussy with this Claire de Lune. All right, hey.
But even a beautiful tune like Claire de Lune, you tune it out when you hear it over and over again. And that brings us to the 4th C of social media.
Which is kindness, our self-intentionally wrong seed letter, but kindness, which is that for so much of our online life, we are being triggered by rage or meanness or uncomfortableness or outrage, both in our news and in our social media processes. So try to be an island of kindness on social media that people can look to as a refuge. Your art will benefit from it. And more importantly, you as a human will benefit from it in how you interact with other people. And how your career interacts with other people, your art interacts with other people. Kindness is one of the most important ones that underpins the other 3.
Yeah, and let that kindness show through in your comments. That's another part of social media that we creative people don't do nearly enough. And that's to make a comment on somebody else's post, to engage in somebody else's post. Not only are we doing it for kindness, there's a Machiavellian reason for this as well, because that helps to expose you to a whole bunch of people who wouldn't be paying attention to you. And if you're being kind in the process, so much the better. You're putting your best foot forward. But commenting on other people's social media is a really big part of growing your own follower base.
Absolutely.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
And now, because I love my friend Brad dearly, I want to invite him to talk about 2 of his favorite acronyms. One is SWIG, and the one before that is FCS, right? So if you're new to the show, you're about to learn that my friend Brad loves his acronyms. He's like the Department of Defense. There's not a phrase in the English language that he doesn't want to make into an acronym.
I do love a good acronym. SWIG is something I want you to think about when you're promoting yourself on social media. And that is say why it's good. That's really what I want you to focus on. You'll see creative people doing terrible social media promotion because they'll tell you everything except why it's good. And really what I want to know is here's the problem. Just next time you're in the park or on a bus or in the subway, watch somebody scrolling social media. You'll see they are making content decisions very, very quickly, in terms of nanoseconds quickly. Okay? You cannot screw around with a whole bunch of nonsense words. You need to get to the point. Here's today's comic, and here's why it's good. That's what I want you to have posted on your wall near wherever you do social media. SWIG, say why it's good. Now, the other one, FCS, answers a question that people ask all the time, and you see this answered incorrectly almost every time that it gets asked, because the question is very, very simple. How many times should I post? This goes to social media in general, doing your 4 C's, but it also goes to how many times should you update a new comic and share that with the world. How many times per week should you be updating a new comic? And you'll hear people very earnestly giving you numbers for this answer, right? Well, you should do two times a week, or you're going to hear somebody say, well, you've got to post 5 times a day, every day on social media. And those are all wrong. I'm sorry, there are no magic numbers. Anyone who tries to give you a magic number answer to these questions is probably not doing you a good favor right there. Here's what I want you to think about. FCS. This is the answer to your social media update question and your comic update question. How often should I post? FCS. Frequent, consistent, significant. And by the way, this goes all the way back to Dave and I posting for the very first time in the year 2000, when the internet was just starting to crest. This has been one truism that has gone through all 5 shifts in internet publishing. FCS. You post as frequently as you can while allowing yourself to maintain consistency. That's consistency in the schedule, as well as consistency in the quality of your work, such that every post is significant.
Yes.
FCS, frequent, consistent, significant. Everyone's FCS is going to be different. Your FCS is going to be different than my FCS. But if you want to figure out how often you ought to be posting a new comic for your readers, the answer is FCS.
So now I immediately hear someone new to webcomics going, well, just give me a number, Brad. How frequent is frequent?
Yeah.
But then go back and listen to Brad's description again, and you'll see how frequent is for you.
Right.
And here's what I mean. I could up my frequency for my posting socially to an umpteenth degree if I just said, hey, I drew 5 pencil lines. Here's 5 more pencil lines. Well, it's another frequent post.
Yep.
Bada bing, bada boom. Hey, now I'm done inking. Here's another process shot. Hey, I've done lettering. Oh, I've moved the lettering 2 inches to the left. Oh, I've created another word balloon. You see what I'm going with this? I could do process steps all day long, and in so doing, have incredibly high frequency.
Yep.
But now tell me, how is that significant?
Right.
What did I share that was significant? And in fact, given the variability of process shots, how were those consistent?
Right.
What I want to be consistent is a finished comic that itself has significant updates to it, and I want to do that as frequently as my own output and life schedule can allow. That's the answer. So does that mean that Brad posts with a different frequency than Dave? Absolutely. It might be the case. Does it mean that we both have significance in our updates? Yes, it does. And that we try to maintain a consistent quality in our art as we do those significant frequent updates? Yes, it does. So that's why FCS is a helpful little hallmark for you as you try to figure out what schedule can work for you.
Yeah. And Dave said a little bit earlier, and I want to circle around back to this, and that is that persistence is the key. All right. We always say on the show, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so let's say you've come up with your update schedule and you get sick and you're like, oh no, I won't be able to post tomorrow.
Right.
Right. And number one, this is okay. You will survive being sick. You will survive missing post updates for your comic, right? It's going to happen.
Right.
The last thing you want to do is go out on social media and say something like, well, it's going to be no comic today because I've got the, sick tummy tum-tums and blah, 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 and all these unnecessary details. That is something you
Sorry,
don't...
I like the unnecessary details.
Oh,
so
you'd be surprised.
Out diarrhea can last for 7 days, gang. Anyway, no comic today.
No, I don't want to know any of that. And not only that, but missing a comic update is forgivable. Calling attention to the fact that you missed it is unforgivable.
Yes,
here's
because
the thing.
everyone has a fire hose of content coming at them. They don't need to be reminded that you are absent in that fire hose for a Tuesday, right?
Yeah.
No need to call it out.
By the way, the same goes for previews. I don't need to know that you finished your comic and you're going to post it tomorrow. That's bullshit. I don't want to. That's a meaningless post. I saw that on Substack just today. I finished my comic and I'm going to post it on Thursday. I don't care. That comic isn't there today. I don't want to hear from you.
Right.
You know?
On a human level, you get it. They're excited.
Yes.
But that doesn't translate into not either share it right then or don't share a damn
or don't
thing.
share it.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about this, because in the early days of webcomics, when Dave and I started out, it was very, very important. In fact, it was crucial for us to post 5 days a week, every day.
Mm-hmm.
And you still see 25 years later, a lot of that thinking sticking around and being ported to today's generation. It's not the case anymore. Okay, the reason Dave and I did it was because we were running an ad revenue generating website. And when Dave and I were doing it, there was no social media. So if you actually found a reader, you had to hold on to them by having something new every day.
And you had to be in their for dear life. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So that's why we did it every day. You see, neither one of us do comic updates every day anymore because the internet has changed so much. But I will say this, for you starting out, if keeping on track means that you set a schedule for yourself, then set a schedule. You say that you're going to post every Tuesday and Thursday, or say that you're going to post every Wednesday. I don't think either one of us would suggest weekends, even in this day and age, to post new content, because internet usage in general kind of dips down a little bit. So I wouldn't suggest that. But whatever your schedule is, if it helps to keep you on track, and that's the only reason I'm going to even talk about schedules. If it helps to keep you on track, then set a schedule and do your darndest to keep to it. But you're going to miss it. You're going to skip. You're going to get sick. Things are going to happen. Even if you've got a buffer, any number of things is going to happen. When that happens, forgive yourself and get back to your schedule as soon as you can, so that you can, again, not for your readers, they didn't notice. They were sitting in front of a smorgasbord of stuff that was sending them food every millisecond. They did not notice you not being there. They will notice you when you come back and post something really great, because that sort of thing does get noticed. A good comic that you post gets noticed, but they're not going to notice that you weren't there yesterday. They had too many other things. By the way, your readers, they have lives. They have stuff going on. They have stuff on their mind. They're not sitting there thinking, did Jerry post today? What could be going on with Jerry? I hope his sick tummy tum-tums is okay. Nobody's thinking this. Nobody's thinking this. I
wonder how day 7 is going for Jerry.
Yeah. So set a schedule only in the sense that it helps you stay on track. Right. But don't get so wound up that you're posting apologies for missing. That the apology you should post is that you posted an apology in the first place and called attention to something that wasn't there. Just get back on track. Get back to posting your stuff. Everything's going to be okay, because it's a marathon. Nobody paid attention to this Thursday. They're going to pay attention looking back over a couple of years worth of audience building on your part.
Right. And I want to reemphasize that point that, again, this is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
Meaning this is not something that you're going to do over a short 3-month period and instantly have success on. This is a years-long project that you're jumping into. But remember, one of the key things we said at the beginning is you're doing it because you love the art and the craft of comics and of comics making. And you want to make a contribution with your own comics to the world, right?
Yeah.
So keeping in mind that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and that you're doing it for basically the love of the game at first, we want you to not rush into monetization.
Yeah.
This is a key problem that a lot of cartoonists have, and it seems to happen sort of at the 9-month point and again around the 2-year mark, where they go, but I've been doing it for 9 months, Brad, consistently. 9 months. Yeah. I've done FCS. I've swigged it every day when I've shared it on social media. I've swigged it. And so, God damn it, when does Dave Kellett make $1, right?
Yeah.
And so they think that they have to start making books, or have to start making t-shirts, or have to start making a Patreon, or have to launch a Kickstarter. And the truth is, with monetizing a comic, it takes time to build a following. So starting on Patreon or Kickstarter too soon is actually a common problem that derails a lot of creators because they're taking what energy that they should still be pouring into the comic and still be pouring into improving the comic. And they're putting it towards merch or patronage or a Kickstarter account or making that first T-shirt or whatever have you. And by the way, they don't have the crowd yet. Because a key thing that Brad always likes to say about crowdfunding, Bradley.
another of Geiger's laws of webcomics. Everything you need to know about crowdfunding is in the word. First comes the crowd, then comes the funding. And you have to build your crowd. The second worst thing that can happen if you start a Patreon before you've done significant audience building is that you get the second worst thing is if you get 0 Patreon backers. That's the second worst thing that can happen. Because then you look at that 0, you wake up to it every day. And of course, it's the first thing you check every morning. Did I get a Patreon backer today? And you don't. And it disheartens you and you get depressed. You think you're doing terribly and it gets into your head. And instead of you focusing on learning what it means for you to do the best comic that you can do, and that's a different thing for everybody, instead of focusing on that, you're focusing on 0 Patreon backers. That's the second worst thing that can happen when you start your Patreon too soon.
What's
you
the
know
first?
What the first is if you've got 2 or 3, because now you're doing everything you can. By the way, 2 or 3 Patreon backers is a negligible amount of money. Unless they're like, your tier is like $200 or something.
In fact, I'll go so far as to say that if you're sort of doing a song and dance for 2 to 3 patrons, which might entail special stuff, might entail trying to community build or maintain that community on Patreon, it might be a money losing proposition in the sense that you could be doing something else with your time. Doesn't matter what. Running a lemonade stand, you could be making more money than it would be doing a Patreon.
Selling plasma would be better. But seriously, the worst thing that can happen is if you get 2 or 3, because then now you're instead of focusing on making that comic good, and that's a long time learning process. It just is. Instead of doing that, you're trying to figure out how to get from 3 to 4. And by the way, 4, still negligible, still not great. And then you're going to try to figure out how to get from 4 to 5. And you've taken your eye off the ball. And you're trying to appease a very small group of people who may not be representative of your entire audience, nor the audience that you're building over a long period of time. You're trying to keep that small group of people happy, and you're making bad decisions. You can, and by the way, the same thing goes for Kickstarter. We've got another law of internet merchandise here at Comic Lab, and that's the T-shirt law. The first person on social media that tells you that they want that thing that you posted on a T-shirt is the first person to disappear when you offer that on a T-shirt. That is an immutable fact for 25 years.
Yeah,
People
ask
say,
us how we know after 25 years of being online.
We put
how
out
we
a
know
lot of
as artists
T-shirts
that is true.
A lot of people disappeared when they saw it. In fact, I got to the point when Redbubbles had a certain amount of functionality rose up to the point. I've done this several times and you could do it with any print-on-demand T-shirt place, but somebody would say, hey, I want that on the T-shirt. And I got to the point where I could produce that T-shirt or a link to that T-shirt within 5 minutes because I am just that spiteful. And I could go boom, boom, boom. And before they walked away from their phone, I had that link and I'd say, oh, you like that on a T-shirt? Here's the link. Do you know how many times I've sold a T-shirt doing that? 0 times. Listen, people saying I'd buy that on a T-shirt is a way for them to compliment you. They think they're being nice. They think they're being helpful. They don't know that they may be sending you on a wild goose chase of merchandise. Do not get swayed by that. It's just somebody being nice. The time for you to launch merchandise is going to be a good bit down the road when you've got a serious crowd that you've built, and then you can start doing crowdfunding and merchandising and all of those other things. But I'm telling you, you start too soon, you are going to regret it because it's going to make you miserable. It's going to take your eye off the ball, and it's going to make that progress that much longer, and we said at the top of the show, this is a long progress, you're going to slow that process down because you won't be focused on the things that matter.
So now we're transitioning into the early years of your comic, right?
Yeah.
You've started the comic, you've launched it, you've been sharing it on social media. Let's start talking about some of the considerations you'll need in the early years, right?
Yeah.
So with the idea that we don't want you to rush into monetization, let's talk about things that we do want you to put your focus on.
Yeah.
One of them is developing your aesthetic by studying good comics. So this is something, Ira Glass has a really lovely talk that you should check out online, where he talks about how there's two tracks towards a career in the arts or the careers in culture making. One track is developing the actual skills that make the thing, make the painting, make the sculpture, make the piece of theatrical art, make the improv, right? That's one set of skills. The alternate set of skills, the sort of second rung on that ladder, is developing both the aesthetic and the editorial eye that tells you when the things you are making are good, when they need improvement, what needs to be improved, and how they need to be improved. So as you're working on your comic in the first years, one of the things we do want you to do is to develop your aesthetic by studying good comics. What works about Watchmen? What works about Calvin and Hobbes? How does Jeff Smith make Bones' story progress well without feeling rushed? How does Kate Beaton give you the arc of the story in Ducks without making you feel like you don't understand what's going on? Right. How do really good comics function? That's part of what you want to be studying in the process while you are making your own comics.
Yeah, and it's going to mean a shift from being a passive consumer of comics and other medium to an active consumer.
Yes.
In other words, when you read a book or listen to an audiobook or watch a movie, it's not just passive. In fact, I recommend a lot of times that you watch something twice or listen to something twice, because the first time you're caught up in the story and what's going on the screen and all that kind of stuff. But it might take you 2 watches of a movie or 2 watches of a TV season to really get past that surface area so that you can start thinking, okay, why did that writer make those choices that they made? How did this work well? And I'm as much of an advocate for consuming good media as I am an advocate for consuming bad media, because you can learn just as much from a poorly written book as you can read a good book and learn things, right? You can. In fact, I sometimes the mistakes of a bad piece of writing jump out twice as loud, and then you go, oh, I don't want to ever make that mistake. That was jarring, right?
Or I've done that myself. Oh, I know when I did that. Yikes. Okay, best not to do that. Yep, exactly.
So let's talk about, like Dave was saying, those first years of your journey as a comic artist. One of the things I want to put on your radar is this, and you're gonna laugh, you're gonna cringe, you're gonna roll your eyes. But I'm telling you, trust me on this, you're going to eventually need a website. And I know you've been told by 100 people that nobody goes to websites anymore, and that's an old idea. Here's the deal. You need one place on the web where you can put things and nobody can take it down. Take a look. Twitter's a great example. Dave and I were on Twitter for how many years?
15 for me, 15.
Yeah, I think it was 15 for me.
I think you were there longer than I was, so 15 for you too, yeah.
And when we finally decided to take all of our content off of Twitter, because for a number of reasons, but also for me, it was like, do I really want them scraping my stuff for AI? Maybe not. When I had to use a script to take everything that I posted off of Twitter for like 2 years. It took me an hour or 2 to get everything scrubbed from that site, and now it's gone. That was a voluntary thing. I can point to you just as many times when that activity was involuntary.
Yeah,
Stuff that
ask Brad about all his beautiful vines that he made in 2011. Where'd those go, Brad?
Yeah.
Brad, where'd your MySpace page go, Brad?
I was brilliant on vines. But seriously, you need one place where you can put things that you can put them the way you want them. You have complete control over them, that somebody isn't going to erase them. That's one of the, and not the only, but that's one of the reasons you need a website.
Let's also talk about this. It's going to, like Brad said, it exists. It's in perpetuity. You control it.
Yep.
But let's also say that in our earlier discussion, we've been talking about you've been posting online in social media frequently, consistently, significantly. You've been telling people why it's good. You've been using swig, say why it's good. You've been improving as a cartoonist, as your aesthetic eye has made you better and your practice at the craft has made it better. So now you're starting to hook people. Well, what if they want to dive in deep to your work?
Right.
Well, they can go back through your timeline. That's hugely inefficient and often means they're also getting curated comics, occasional thoughts that are creative that are not comics. What if they just want to read Brad Geiger's comics? What if they just want to read Dave Kellett's comics? That's what the website's for, because that's a key stage in getting them from a casual reader to a very consistent reader to a passionate reader to eventually what you're going to translate them into is a book buyer or a Kickstarter backer or a Patreon backer, right? So you're moving them up the ladder of passion for your comics, and the website is a key part of that.
When somebody joins my Patreon, I send them a 1-question questionnaire that just says, how did you find out about my Patreon? Between 65 and 70% of them say the Evil Inc. website. And that's been true I've been doing Patreon for 10 years now. That's been true for 10 years of that questionnaire going out. Let's put it in the middle there, because depending on what period of time, let's say 67% of those folks found out about me through the Evil Inc. website. Websites are not passe. They're very powerful, and you need them for insurance for when things go belly up on this platform or that. You need a hub on the web. It doesn't need to be done right now. Certainly not in your first year. But I want it to be on your radar. I want you to be moving towards it, because eventually, as you decide you're going to do this long term, you do need that website.
Right. And as we said at the beginning of this talk, there will be future liminal moments in social media when certain platforms are dying and new ones haven't yet taken their place, but are growing, but haven't yet taken their place. That's exactly describing what we are in right now. A lot of the previously established platforms have gone too far in their enshittification process. They are dying slowly, sometimes some of them faster than others. But the new ones aren't necessarily taking their place yet, Substack and Blue Sky among them. So in that liminal period, in that position, in that moment of change, you want to have a website that is consistently holding all of your archives in good times and in bad. And you can move fans between platforms to the website, move them from the website to the Patreon, et cetera, et cetera. The website is a key part. It's a key brick in the wall of your eventual career. So not needed necessarily for launch, but something you want to consider as the months and the years go on. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so as we're wrapping this up, you've started, you're kind of going down your path. As you get your sea legs and get kind of a sense of what you're doing, what I want you to do eventually is to reach out to different comic artists and people that you respect and get honest feedback to improve your work. And you'll find that that's actually harder to do than you think. I do comics consultations. And I had booked one just recently, and the person I got done, it was like a 16-page Google document that I'm like, okay, I'd like you to consider fixing this, and this. We went down for an hour. And the person at the end, I said, now listen, I don't want you to feel, you're doing a lot of good things. I don't want you to feel like I beat up on you, but I wanted to give you a bunch of stuff that you could work on. And he goes, oh no, this has been amazing. He said, after listening to an hour of me saying, no, don't do this, don't do this. He said, this has been amazing. He says, because I knew there was something wrong. I couldn't get anyone to tell me. My friends weren't going to tell me. People that he reached out to online weren't going to tell him. But, but this was the first time that somebody actually went down and said, hey, this isn't working. We need to talk about that. And here's some ideas on how you can do that better. Boop, 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 boop. I want you to think about different ways that you can do that in your own way. What I'm going to suggest without thinking twice is the Patreon community at patreon.com/comiclab. You get access to our private Discord server. And we've got a special channel there called the Critique Channel. And you can put your work in there and get a whole bunch of professionally minded cartoonists just like you, comics artists and writers who are on the same path as you, and they will give you very, very straightforward, constructive criticism on where you are, how you can improve, how we can address certain things. That Discord, number one, the Discord server is kind of amazing because it's a really fun group of people who are always talking comics. But that channel alone is a great opportunity for you to get some honest feedback on your work and maybe some suggestions how to do better. It's not the only one. There's other options out there, but you're going to find that getting somebody to be actually brutally truthful with you is kind of tough, but it's also crucial because doing this in a bubble, doing this in a vacuum, is going to lead you to some pretty bad decision making if you don't get somebody from the outside giving you comments.
A huge agree and huge cosign about that. And a key part of that is someone who themselves is doing comics and is aware of the language of comics, the limitations of comics, the constrictions of comics, but also the potentials of comics and what's out there and what's been done with it. And part of that is when Brad says reach out to other comics creators who are doing stuff that's similar to yours and build those networks. Part of that is you don't necessarily want to listen to your cousin Murray, who's never drawn a comic, never done a comic. It is useful to see if the comic landed with Murray, don't get me wrong, but Murray might not have the best comics making advice. Like, how can I make this better? Did it work? Yes or no? That's good bit of data for you to have. Like, did it work with Murray? Just as it's good to have, like, did this comic get retweeted a lot or the like, because that's a good data set. But when you're trying to improve, that's where peers and pros can come in handy, and one of the reasons why we like the Discord server. But also, you can just start befriending other comics who are sort of similar in their career path to you. Where are they in their journey? Are they a couple years in? Perfect. Is it someone who's been doing it for 30 years? Maybe not so perfect. They have a very different set of considerations and concerns than you have at your career. But finding other artists online is not impossible. In fact, it's one of the more valuable things that I've done in my career is finding peers that I both love their work and I love them as people, and we can chime back and forth about what's working or not working or problems that they're facing. That's more of a long-term thing. Ways to do that include going to local drink and draws or joining the National Cartoonist Society on the local regional basis, or going to a comic book shop or a comic book. God, I could say it right. This is what happens when you talk straight for 50 minutes. Going to a Comic-Con and seeing peers that are roughly the same level that you are in your career and just talking shop after the show, not what they're trying to sell, but maybe offer to buy them a coffee or a beer or lunch or something and see what can happen from that. So there are ways to build friendships both online and off in a way that is advantage to your career long term in terms of getting the feedback that you need to improve yourself as an artist and eventually as a business person.
And there's another reason I want you to think about networking as you're going through posting this online and other places. And that is this, because 2025 is shaping up to be kind of a limbo in terms of social media. Like Dave said at the top of the show, a liminal period in social media. One of the ways that you're going to be able to navigate this is through your networks. And what I'm seeing right now, particularly in webcomics, is the return of collectives and collaborations. I'm seeing a lot of people that are doing, like, for example, humorous superhero comics. And I'm seeing them link up and form networks so that they can cross-promote. And by the way, all of those things that Dave and I did 25 years ago that was important before social media, cross-promotion, linking to other people that were similar to you, all of those old strategies are resurfacing in this liminal period of soft social media because people have got to do it. So I want you to think about your comics networks, other people who are doing comics similar to yours, and either building a collaboration or getting involved in a collaboration that's ongoing, to become involved in not a collective. I'm a fan of loose collectives. Nothing that involves you giving up your business.
Because remember, you own and control your own career.
Yes. Nothing that involves you. Oh, you're my publisher now? Great. Nah. Stay away from those collectives. Only collectives that are people that are sharing things like promotion and stuff like that. You don't want to
And
give
best
over
practices,
control of your
Yes.
business. But that's the other reason I want you to think about your networks, is because these are going to be the ways that you get through this really weird period of social media that's popping up for 2025.
Now, one thing I want to say as we reach the end of this is you notice we haven't really talked about how to start your Patreon, how to start your Kickstarter, how to print your first book, how to make your first tchotchke of your first pin or your first t-shirt, how to exhibit at your first Comic-Con. Those are all business steps further down the road. This episode specifically is how to start your webcomic in 2025. But if you're interested in how to start a Patreon, how to start a Kickstarter, how to do your first book, Brad and I have over 300 episodes of this show now. Over at patreon.com/comiclab. You can search by keywords. In fact, there's more than 300 because we also do 300 episodes of a second podcast that's recorded exclusively for patrons of the show. So it's now over 600 episodes of in-depth, detail-oriented, here's how you do X, Y, and Z on Patreon, on book publishing, on Comic-Cons, on networking, on social media, on Kickstarter. And so search by keywords over at patreon.com/comiclab. There's both collections that you can jump in on if you want to go topic specific, or jump into the Patreon whole cloth, and you will see years of podcasts that record in detail stuff like our advice for those situations.
Yeah, and in terms of those shows that you're going to get by searching, any of the shows that are public, you do not need to be a member to listen to those or to access those. Anything that's public, you can go to the Patreon page and access those by keyword and just sit there and listen to them. You might see some pro tips episodes you're interested in, and then at that point you can consider joining, but you don't have to join to use that. And that's a really great search engine for finding things that are on your mind at the time. At the very least, you'll see that there's more information out there for you to access. And that's kind of nice when sometimes you feel like you're making this stuff up as you go along and you just don't know if there's any answers out there. You'll see that we've probably talked about it once or twice already. And there's lots of things that we have to share with you on that.
In fact, I'm going to do the opposite of the hard sell and say, listen to as much of the free stuff as you can. And then as your cartooning kicks in and you're listening to Comic Lab comes in, then you can consider jumping on Patreon. But Brad and I really do love paying forward and trying to save time for young artists that are jumping in, which this episode is part of that. Is like we're trying to save you the time, the trouble, and the emotional distress of launching, but making them early mistakes that we and our peers might have made in those early years. And so to that same extent, those archives are open for you to listen to. Dive in as deep as you need and you want as you face these years ahead. In fact, they're great to draw to, a lot of people seem to report. So have them open, have the episodes open at your drawing desk as you're drawing and learn while you draw. It is a great way to do it. And keep in mind that you can always be searching topic specific over at patreon.com/comiclab.
Bottom line, if you're starting a comic in 2025, number one, we threw a lot of stuff at you, but one thing you've got to know, there's never been a better time to get into comics than right now. There's never been as wide of a landscape for you to jump into. The gatekeepers are almost entirely gone. Yeah,
they really are.
It's a wonderful time for you to express your unique vision for comics and put it out into the world. It's a wonderful, wonderful time. And as you do that, remember the theme of this entire show: do it for the love of comics. That's going to be what keeps you through the good times and the bad in these first couple of years. And if you don't have the love of comics, you're going to find it gets real difficult real quick. But don't you think, Dave, this is the time that if you're going to do this, really, I think you've got to focus on the love. Yeah,
on an episode titled, How to Start a Webcomic in 2025, the core message we would say for the first years of your art journey is do it for love.
Yeah.
And what a beautiful way to start, because you, like us, see the possibilities of this art form, the ways you can be both writer, director, actor, stage manager, costumer. It is a beautiful art form. It is my favorite thing that I have ever done as being a cartoonist. I love it. Brad loves it with every bit of our fiber. We talk about it damn near every time we can during the day. When we're not cartooning, it is a joy-filled art form. So dive into it joyfully and produce it joyfully, and good things will come with time, effort, and consistency. And that is, and both Brad and I wish you all the best as you begin in 2025.
Absolutely. You know, one thing that brings me joy is just talking with you on this podcast, except for the part where I've got to say that you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my wonderful friend, Brad Geiger, the very talented editor of webcomics.com and the incredibly talented creator of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com.
And my friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode. And thank you so much for bringing us those 5-star reviews over there on Spotify. We are absolutely burning up those podcast charts.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your continuing support at patreon.com/comiclab. So I will go ahead and say that twice, patreon.com/go make incredible comics.
Okay, Dave, I got one for you.
Okay.
Ready?
Yeah.
Bum, 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 bum. Can you do that one?
I mean, it's Beethoven, right? Is it his fifth?
Yeah.
I don't know. Is it his fifth?
That was Beethoven's fifth. Absolutely.
Was it? Okay. All right.
Okay, now you do one for me.
Okay. And she's buying the stairway to heaven.
That was Debussy, wasn't it?